Hello, I'm Comic Field. Let's discuss countries. Specifically, what country Canterlot High and the four Equestria Girls movies take place in. There are 197 countries in the United Nations. Well, there are two observer states, Palestine and Vatican, so technically it's 195, but I'm narrowing it down to 20. The 19 member states in G20, plus Spain because they have a seat there as well. So technically it's 20, but Spain is an official member. Plus, it's kind of obvious that Equestria Girls doesn't take place in North Korea or Yemen or Eritrea or any of these like insane dictatorships or war-torn countries. These 20 are reasonable. So let's begin. I'll go from what I think is the least likely to where I personally think Equestria Girls does take place in. Another note, in Comicverse it takes place in Germany. But I did that because Germany is the most important Earth nation in Comicverse. This is an analysis in the regular MLP canon. Now, let's begin. 20. Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is quite obviously not the setting of MLP Equestria Girls. Let's look at geography. Saudi Arabia is a desert, and EQG, there are plains and forests. There are a few oases, which is where Canterlot High could be, but I'm pretty sure oases are actually protected by the Saudi government, i.e. they cannot be built on top of. Plus, in Saudi Arabia, it is mandated that every woman and girl wear a covering, like a hijab or a burqa, in public. It's a part of the Islamic tradition there. And notice how in Equestria Girls they aren't wearing them. So yeah, not in Saudi Arabia. Next is Turkey. It's more likely, but we must look at geography again. Turkey may not be a big desert like Saudi Arabia, but it is still pretty dry. And while Turkey is secular and the hijab isn't mandated, the country is still relatively conservative. So there are a few that still wear it, including in schools. And to see it not really be there is kind of weird if you're thinking that takes place in Turkey. Next is Mexico. This time it's mostly geography based. A lot of Mexico is, like the previous two, very dry. There are some grassy areas, but the majority of Mexico is really dry. Mexican schools also aren't this big. Usually they're smaller. We gotta take that into account too. Next are South Korea and Japan. They both share the exact same problem. They may not be dry or anything, but here I'm looking more towards how the schooling is. In South Korea and Japan, the school is extremely strict, and from some of the practices I've heard they do in those countries, I'd argue that it's borderline child abuse. Like, geez, chill. I'm not getting into that. It's not in South Korea and Japan, in my opinion. China is next. While China, their schools are strict like Korea and Japan, they are nowhere near as bad. Well, maybe. I don't know. Also, it's how the schools in China are that's also different from Canterlot High. In Canterlot High, it's a traditional Western school, but in China, they use technology and use it good. It's actually pretty awesome. But yeah, I don't think it's in China. Next is South Africa. You've heard it before. Pretty dry country. And the schools in South Africa have a similar issue to Mexico. The schools are kind of small compared to Canterlot High. Now, the schools in South Africa are comparable to Canterlot High in attitude, I'll give them that. I don't think it's in South Africa. Next is Spain. Spain is a bit dry, though it's got trees and plains too. But the geography does knock it down a few points. In my opinion, the schools themselves are pretty accurate, but it's the geography that kind of nails it down a little bit. Next is Indonesia. Indonesia is in a similar situation to Turkey. Secular, but conservative. It gets a lot of points because the schools in Indonesia look similar enough, and its geography is on point outside the volcanoes. But the society is really conservative. And Indonesia is like the KSA, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, a Muslim country. I also heard Indonesia's schools are strict too, though nowhere near as bad as Japan or South Korea, though. Next is Australia. Australia is very dry. In the outback, the cities are actually pretty accurate. Due to the edges of Australia being grassy, and all that, the schools are similar enough, but the geography does play a part in it being low. This is when it starts getting pretty accurate. The next 10 countries are very similar in their ranking, in my personal opinion. So let's do the process of elimination. India, probably not due to the strictness of the schools. The geography and look at the schools are on point, though. It's probably not Russia, especially not today, but even in 2013, Russian schools were pretty full of propaganda and Putin's awesome and all that shit. The geography is pretty accurate, though. Italy and the UK are similar in geography, but not exact. Too grassy, not enough forests. Brazil and Argentina are the exact opposite. Too foresty, not enough plains. This leaves France, Germany, Canada, and the USA. France shares the UK and Italy's problem. Germany kind of does too, but so they're eliminated. This leaves the United States and Canada. And of the two, I have to say Canada. I'm sorry, but I've been to American school. They are not like this. Canada schools, to my knowledge, match it more. So I'm saying Canada. So my personal theory is Canada. Where do you think Canterlot High takes place? Give me your best argument for Saudi Arabia for all I care. Or give me a country I didn't even take into account, like Peru or something. I don't know. Subscribe for more horse.